Okay, thanks everyone for being here this morning, and it's my pleasure. I mean, Antonio, the director of our institute, have to give this introduction, but it's my pleasure just to be here and introduce you Anthony Newman, a publisher of Elsevier. As probably all of you know, Elsevier is the largest company in the world dedicated to the published business. So Anthony has been a senior publisher for more than 20 years. He is in charge of ruling and governing around 20 journals, and he is the person who decides who is the editor and who not owns, but who dictates the rules of every journal. In this morning, he's going to give us two different talks. In the first talk, he is going to describe how to write a proper paper, how to construct a paper with tips and tricks about how to prepare that paper to get more chances of being published. And in the second talk, after the break, he's going to give us how are the rules to answer, to respond the reviewers, and how to be a proper reviewer. The plan is for this morning, so is 2 talks. The first talk is 2 hours until 11:30. We will have a coffee break. The coffee break is free, so I mean it's free because you can go everywhere you wish, and around 12 we will come back here just for the second talk. Without more introduction, I'll give the word to Anthony.
Fine. Thank you, Jose. So thank you for inviting me to be here today. And as Jose was saying, the idea is to talk about how to get published, not just how to write the paper, but how to get it published. Because if you write it and it's not published, it never happened. So we've actually got to make sure that whatever you are writing gets published. I was here about 5 years ago doing a similar workshop, which was recorded in a similar way, but in the same room. This is an updated version of that one from 5 years ago. The one that's out there now on YouTube has had about 100,000 downloads. So it shows that it really is, there's a need out there for this information worldwide. It's easier, better in person. You can ask questions, but for those who can't get to one of these in-person workshops, the recording is a good substitute. So the talk is very simple: how to write great papers and how to get published. If you can't get good research, that's not really my problem. That's the problem of you and your professors or your supervisors to make sure your research is good enough to publish. So often people just don't understand how publishing works. And by understanding how publishing works as my job today, you'll make a lot more confident so that when you do submit your paper, you know the processes and the procedures that will happen to your paper when it does get submitted and goes through the whole peer review process. So before I go any further, a quick question: who here has published a paper so far? Okay, a few. Who's trying to publish a paper? A few more, okay. Of those who published a paper, who's published more than 20 papers? More than 50? More than 100? 200? Okay. No, I'm serious. 200 is a magic number in life sciences anyway. For those who haven't yet started, it gets easier after the first 10 or 15, they tell me. But it's never really true. It really is always hard work writing a paper because it's the boring part. We love being researchers, but we've still got to finish off and publish. But at the same time, we're now doing the next bit of research, much more interesting, much more distracting. So it's really the perseverance to finish off that previous project and to publish it, and then keep on going with the next project. I'm not going to use the laser pointer much. I'm going to use the slide changer. So this is what you might think about peer review. If you can see, this is actually, it's a nice cartoon. It's by called Nick Kim. He is a biologist in New Zealand, and he allows people to use his scientific cartoons free of charge everywhere in the whole world. He says, if you're brave, use my cartoons in your thesis. Which is fine, it's good. So it looks like you're the scientist going to try and get your paper accepted. And in between, all these people who used to be your friends, your colleagues, suddenly become hostile with their axes, their guns, the chainsaw, and the Grim Reaper at the end, just trying to stop you get published. That's what it seems like. It's not like that, but that's what it seems like. So how can we make these people put down their weapons and help you? That's the idea of this morning, to actually get you to interact with referees and use their examples, their suggestions, to make your paper better. So as Jose said, there's lots of things happening in the first talk. There's how to get published, looking at what are scientific journals and books, and what you're going to publish, what sort of papers, where you're going to publish, what sort of journal you're going to use, what sort of article type you're going to have, a short or a long, or review, or whatever. And then how the article is laid out in a traditional way or typical way, in case you're not sure of the best way of doing it. Then after that, it's talking about peer review process and how you interact with referees. A little bit about open access, a little bit about social media, and the idea being then a bit on publishing ethics. So that whole process takes a couple of hours. So we don't have time, say, for a break. The break is in 2 hours' time. If you need to have a bathroom break, then have to go and come back, basically. I'll keep on going. So firstly, we have peer review. And peer-reviewed journals is the best way forward we can do with this. And in the wide world of the scientific, technical, medical area, you've got around 2,000 publishing houses. And well, some are huge ones, like Springer or Wiley-Blackwell or Elsevier. And some tiny publishing houses publishing one journal a year in hardback or something, and everything in between. Sorry. And what they're doing, these publishing houses are publishing around 28,000 peer-reviewed journals in that period. 1.8 million articles a year get written and published. Many more get written and don't get published. 1.8 million. So your scientific community worldwide in all scientific fields generates this 1.8 million articles a year. So that's what you as scientists do out there. What does that mean? It means that publishing houses have got to make sure there's enough journals for you to read, the articles you want to read, and to publish the work you've written. So that's the whole process. And what it is, it's almost a cycle as well we're doing. So a typical good publishing house, it could be any of the major publishing houses, happens to have an Elsevier logo here, it could be anything there. They have a job of actually processing these papers coming in. So firstly, the papers come in, and as the papers come in, the editors look at them and decide yes or no, are they good enough to go out for peer review or not? And then after that, it goes out for peer review, they get reviewed, the accepted ones get processed, edited, prepared, get printed or put online, and then they get looked at and then downloaded and cited and so on. The whole cycle goes around. In terms of numbers, in our particular publishing house, there's about 13,000 editors. Well, it's about 2,000 journals, so that's why we have so many editors. And about half of these are desk rejected, these submissions. They're not good enough. The ones that go out to the reviewers, then they're looked at by typically 2 to 3 reviewers per paper. And then some of those are accepted, 1/3 of a million a year. And then they get prepared, put online, and then they go to join their sort of peers in Science Direct. And the same thing will happen, let's say, with Springer Link, and so on. So that's sort of the process. And what we found over the years, that so many people couldn't understand how it was working and making silly mistakes. Clever scientists, clever researchers doing silly mistakes. So that's why we came up with the idea of having some sort of tips and tricks workshop. So we've been doing these across Elsevier, across the world for a decade or more, 15 years. And it always surprises us how little people know about the publishing industry. It's supporting all your research works. It's a platform for you to publish in, but most people don't know how it works. So it's our job to to teach you this so you better understand. If you become editorial board member or an editor of a journal, you get far better ideas, but as an ordinary, plain researcher, very important people publishing articles, you still need to know how the whole process works. So initially, everything was in print, and so before you guys were all here, of course. And then around about 1997 was the last year of print only, then it became electronic as well. And a very rapid conversion to electronic, first with flat PDFs and then more with HTML. So by now, 99% of the usage is online in life sciences. In some areas like medicine, it's about 95% online. Now that's important if you happen to be an author. Remember that every single person's going to see your article electronically, either online as a live electronic image, or they've saved it as a PDF and look at it later. So basically, all the richness of the electronic environment is what you need to make use of to make your paper more interesting to the reader. At the end of the day, it's the reader that's important, not you, the author. And of course, you've got different changing role of journals. So electronic access means much more visibility, much more downloads, much lighter looking of it. People don't read the whole article as they would have done in the library. They go to see bits of it and they look at a bit of research here, a comment here, a table there, a figure, and so on. We all do this. And of course, with this electronic systems, you also have electronic submission, makes it far easier, but also it makes it far easier to miss things out. If you were going to send everything in a big envelope, you'd be much more careful that everything was in the envelope. But around 5% of articles have things missing. You say there's going to be 4 figures, and you send 3 or 5 or something. Or that there's the conflict of interest statement was missing, or you didn't add the reviewers when you're asked to. All sorts of small little things, which it's quite important to make sure that you cover all these things when you are going to do a submission. And of course, you have the new publishing models, the idea of open access. It's just an experiment, a very successful experiment, but still an experiment. And of course, delayed open access, open archiving. These are interesting things coming along. There's also much more other sorts of innovations being developed by various publishing houses. So that's the sort of various things. We're trying to come up with things useful to you as scientists before you knew you needed them. That's the idea. So why publish, and what are you going to publish? As I said, if you don't publish your research to the outside world, it never happened. You could say to someone, I did a great research project. Oh, fine, yeah, where did you publish it? We haven't yet, it's still in the drawer. Did it 10 years ago. No one's interested. If you haven't published it to the outside world, it never happened. So that's the basic process of why you're going to publish. And what are you going to publish? You're going to publish useful material. And that's the important thing. What's useful? Everyone has a different perception of what's useful. But in terms of your personal reason for publishing, to get a degree, the norm. It could be you can do the Scandinavian model, publish 3 papers, you write the introduction and the conclusion, and you defend that. But normally, you publish in parallel to your thesis. And if you are publishing papers during your research to write your thesis, what's happening is that answers the question of the examiner who says, is this research publishable? If you've published it already, they know, yes, it is, great. Funding. There's never enough funding, and you might be lucky that you're working in a lab that has good funding, but many of the senior researchers have to apply for funding again and again and again. It's very complicated, and it's not as successful as it used to be. And to get funding, the funding bodies look for 2 things. They look at who you are and what you want the money for. What you want the money for is you're saying, I want the money, and this much money for this particular research project. And you're then describing very carefully what you expect to get out of this. And then who you are is not if you have a nice Facebook page or something, but actually, what have you done as a research team? Where have you published? What's your publication history? Publication history per person is there forever in a public record, and that's what's looked at by funding bodies when they think about whether they're going to be funding you or not. The strength of the application and who is asking for this money. The same thing with the promotion. If you're after, say, to be on permanent faculty, then you may be applying for some sort of a position there, and you probably have 200 other people doing the same thing. How are you going to stand out? Partly by the strength of your application, and secondly, by your publication history. That combination is there. So again, What you've published is part of who you are as a scientist. It doesn't go away, it's always there. And so that, in effect, is that sort of invisible currency and value. It's like sort of your own Bitcoin, basically, of who you are and what you've done. And of course, it could be some question, it could be some private, personal thing while you're doing it. Perhaps your mother was a famous scientist and you're following in her footsteps. Great, wonderful. But the reality is, it doesn't matter, because once it's been through peer review, then the majority of papers are good. So there's a few aren't, but most are good. And then what happens there is if you find it in a peer-reviewed journal or a peer-reviewed book, you can assume it's actually okay. You can assume that what's there is valid. You can then see what's there, take the information, and use it in your research studies. And don't really care about why you did it. If you pick up a journal article online and read it through, you're looking at what's in it for you. You're not thinking, I wonder if this person has a famous mother. Of course not. You're wondering about, can I use that figure somewhere? Is this a very interesting conclusion, interesting discussion? What future experiments should be done, suggested by these authors? That's what you're reading it for. No one reads scientific articles for fun. If you do, you should get a social life. Because normally, you're reading it, what can you get out of it? What can you learn from this to help you and your research team get better? That's what it's all about. So why publishing? Because you've got to be seen to be there. What are you going to publish? New work, original work, a new method. Everyone loves a new method. Or you write a review or a summary of a topic. You could do sound science publishing. You publish in something like PLOS ONE or Helion or something, whereby it's just, you publish it because it's not wrong. But it's far better if you can make your manuscript advance the knowledge of the field. If the field is expanding, why do a Me Too paper if you can do something better? It's always trying to do something better, something unknown to what's out there. What you should not be publishing is things that are out of date, things that aren't scientific. Not scientific things, that's what blogs are for. But for scientific research, that's peer-reviewed journals. And out-of-date things, if it's published in a certain way and it's been repeated what's been done before, or you're saying something and someone else has done something better and newer and more up-to-date, you shouldn't publish that. You find something else to publish. If you published it once is enough, not twice, once. It's findable electronically, so therefore you don't need to do it twice. And of course, anything that's incorrect, illogical, wrong, we don't want to know. And so you are working in a very interesting environment. It's very collaborative, but it's very competitive. You're collaborating with people, but you're competing to get into journals. There are 3% more scientists every year, and there's writing a bit more, about 4% articles in general, and there's less growth of journals than that, so there's much more competition. So if you look back, say, 30 years, so someone perhaps the senior faculty in their earlier days can look back and they found it very easy to publish. Because in those days, 30% of the papers that were submitted got rejected. 70% got accepted. Now, it's the reverse. Now, 70% get rejected and 30% get published. Is that fair? No, but that's the reality. So how can you be in the 30% is the question. That's what we're going to talk about today. How can you be in the 30%? You've got to have a very strong, effective manuscript. Solid, powerful, explains what you've done in a very clear way. So a good paper, a good manuscript, once it's accepted, a manuscript becomes a paper. A good manuscript, a good paper, it's got great content and it's explained very carefully. If you've got great content and don't explain it, what a waste of your data. If you've got a great layout and style and clarity of explaining things and almost nothing in it, hollow paper, it's also a waste. It's the combination you need to actually make you stand out against the other articles that will be submitted to that journal on that particular period. So a strong manuscript is actually, it's simple really. It's got to be novel, clear, useful and exciting. Novel, new of course, new material if we can, not Me Too papers. Clear, the clarity, understanding, of course we're writing in English normally. Most people English is second language, so therefore It has to be as clear as you can, so there's no room for error. Useful, of course, helpful to the researchers, and exciting, not just boring. And scientists in general are not exciting people. We're not. We know we're not. But we can actually write in an exciting way about the things we've found. We can be inspired by what we've actually discovered to explain it in an exciting way. That's the important thing. And also, you've got to present it in a very clear way. You're not writing a thriller, a novel, whereby there's a plot twist at the end and no one saw it coming. You actually got to be taking the reader by the hand, saying, dear reader, here's what the problem was, here's what we did, here's what we found, here's what we think is going on. What do you think? That logical line running through the paper is actually the clarity you need to have to explain to the readers, so they can be interested in what you've done. Exciting message, explain clearly. And of course, so, the problem with most people, in speech or written, we tend to be very implicit. We just sort of assume people will know things. Well, I'm sure that the referees will notice that that second figure, the graph's a bit different. That's what it's all about. They'll find that. That's not good enough. You really got to have the idea, how can I be explicit and clear? Here's what I found. Here's what we found. Here's what we think is going on. And that is the idea of the scientific significance. It's got to be really, really easy to spot, not just tucked away in a little conclusion, but everywhere. In the abstract, in the discussion, in the conclusion, the explicit information in a very, very strong, exciting way. Because otherwise, it'll just not show up. It'll just be lost in the sort of the noise of the scientific publishing process. To get out there into the wide world, you've got to go through peer review. Before you go through peer review, you've got to make sure that the editors are happy with what you sent in, and willing to send it out for peer review, and the reviewers are happy with what you've written, and then make their comments so you can improve the paper so it gets accepted. Everyone's busy. All people are busy people everywhere. Most editors, of course, are not full-time. There's a tiny fraction of a percent work full-time. As editors, the rest are all full-time scientists. They're teaching, they're writing, they're presenting at conferences, they are writing grant proposals, the whole thing. And in their spare time, they get papers coming in to look at those to see what's good enough for their journal. And then they send it out to a reviewer with a similar sort of time problems and pressures to review. So that whole process is liable to be disrupted easily by pressure of work and everything else. So if you can actually send a good, strong paper in, clearly written, well laid out, a very strong message in there, you're halfway there to getting your paper sent out for peer review. Of course, the scientific content we looked at by the referees, but the first step is to get it past the editor filter to make sure it's clear enough, good enough to send out there. And if you saw some of the junk that gets sent in to editors, you understand why there's such a high level of desk reject. And so that's very, very a useful thing about being a referee. You can see all the junk that comes in. But the thing about the editors, they say great paper laid out is, compared to all the junk that came in the same morning, then that's much more likely to go out for peer review. So before you even get that far, of course, you've got to do your research. Before you do your research, you've got to make sure it hasn't been done before. So before it hasn't been done before, you go and check in the library maybe, or you check online, do all sorts of different things, trying to see what has been published, and you spot the gaps. Because the gap analysis is the way you're trying to fill in the research. It is research being done in various places, bits in between are the areas that are open for more research to be done. I prefer you not to use Google for this. Google's great for finding restaurants. But the important thing is use something with a better search engine in there. So remember, if you find results in Google, or other similar sort of search engines that are free like this, someone paid to have that result in the first page, second page. And that's all sponsored information. So not the best way to look for information. So you go to somewhere like, if you have to, Google Scholar or Web of Science or Scopus, PubMed, other similar things which use Boolean search logic to go and find interesting information. You're looking to see what's been published, reading it through, and then also you see in their conclusion, often they'll suggest extra experiments. And you can see if they've been done or not. That gives you an idea for what really is out there as a possibility for you to research. And normally in a lab you'll have, or department, you'll have several people all doing their own different research, perhaps with a head of lab or a professor or whatever. And what's happening is that one person's the main person in that project, and they're helping with that someone else who's the main person, and that's where various papers are coming from. So you're a co-author in some papers, and you're an author in another paper. But between you, you're a team, and you're going to research these various things. So this happens to be a screenshot. You can't read it now. You'll see it better when you get the slides later. What's been cited and from where? That's just an idea. It's useful to know who's done what. So you can no, this happens to be Scopus, but you can sort by citations. See the citation classics on the top. You can filter by reviews. You can filter by country. You can filter by people. All sorts of different things. The idea being your keywords, you can find out how the field's growing or shrinking or whatever. A lot of information you can find out which helps you. You can do a country filter and everything else. If you find someone who's very interesting in your field, you can also follow them. Follow them, not like electronic stalking. You can follow them whereby you say to, say, Scopus, whenever that person publishes, please send me an alert. So that's a way to follow someone who happens to be very strong in your field, or you want to see what they're publishing. Or it could be the people who are active in your field and they're in effect potential collaborators or potential competitors. So it's nice to know what they've published and when. Because once you've done the research once, seeing who's out there, set up your alerts, then you keep being told about these things, which is great. It saves you keep looking, because what you don't want to do is do your research and start doing your research here in your lab bench or whatever, head down, not looking up, not seeing what's out there. Because what's out there are other people publishing other things which are useful to your research work, so you can actually add that information in as a citation. And also, they may publish exactly what you're working on before you get a chance to publish. Oops, shucks. You see what they've published and see how you can change, add, amend your research to extract a paper from that. You can't publish what you were going to do because someone else has just done that. That's the reality of publishing. It's like a sort of a strategic information gathering. I've got the word checklist in red here because later on you'll all get, apart from the PDF of these slides, you'll also get a PDF of a checklist, gives you an idea of how to set up your research projects and publish your papers and so on. So the idea being you're just going to become better at using the tools, the search tools, to find information online. It's practice. Just like no one really taught you how to do certain things until suddenly you had to know, like riding a bicycle. Once you know it, you know it. Using a centrifuge. The same thing with searching for something in PubMed. Once you've done that searching with mesh terms, you've got that skill set forever, basically. So then you're thinking, okay, you're doing your research, you and your colleagues, and you're saying, okay, well, is it new? Is it interesting? If not, why are you doing it? Is it a hot topic? Are there people publishing it? Can you notice other journals with lots of articles like this? Are there lots of downloads? If you go to a conference, there are lots of people on that topic in the room, more than was expected, so the room's over full. Have you given solutions, a new method or something? Do you think you and your colleagues have done enough experiments? Or do you think you might need to do one more? You always do the perfect set of experiments. That might take years. Have you got time for that? Have you got enough information to make a strong, clear story? That's the question. If the answer is yes, great. The answer is not yet, do a bit more. One more experiment or some other discussion or whatever. That's the important thing. So that's really useful to have. There's very few papers are written by one person, normally written by groups of people. And so the group of you work out exactly these various points. Are you ready to publish? Okay. Does that mean you start to write the paper? No. That's too easy. You've got to decide. Is it going to be a short paper or is it going to be a long paper? A short paper, perhaps you haven't got much information. Perhaps it's a case report or something. Or perhaps it's so amazing you want to get it out there quickly to establish intellectual property rights on your particular article, that content. Or it could be a full article, which is fine. What's a full article? It depends on your field. Some fields, a full article is 8, 10 pages, some it's 20 or 30 pages. You could also, of course, do a review paper where you're collecting together a bunch of information from other articles, and then what you're doing is you're then synthesizing in some layout, and you actually do a constructive evaluation of that content as a review. Also, you've got new sorts of research elements, like a micro article, or just a short method update or something, or data in brief, or other similar things. So there's all sorts of different options available to you. Sometimes you might do a full article, and then later on, you've still got some more extra data, not enough for full article, so you do a short article afterwards. And you always cite your first article in your introduction. So it's extra information based on your earlier work. Or if you've done that short article, later on you do a full article, but you cite your first paper. Because you must always cite your previous work, or else it looks like you're trying to get more articles out of one bit of data. And of course, before you even start writing, you could say, yeah, we're going to write the article. If you write the article, that's fine. What happens is you decide you're going to write the manuscript and then look for a suitable journal. And you've written the manuscript, and it looks pretty good. And then you go through all this idea of picking the right journal, and you select, you and your co-authors, the right journal for you, and you find that it's actually, they have a word limit. And you check what you've written, and it's 30% more. Oops. Far better to pick the journal first before you start writing, and then base your manuscript writing around what that journal wants and needs and demands. So to get the best journal, you've got to think of the reader's needs, not the author's needs. You're the author. Okay. Fine. You want to publish. But the reader is much more important. The reader needs to get information, they can get it from everywhere, and you'd rather they got it from you. So how can you give them what they need to have in a way that they want it? That's the challenge that successful writers achieve, and unsuccessful ones don't. So you've got to pick a good journal to start with. You might say, oh yes, I'll go for Nature, I'll go for Science. Yeah, sure, fine. Very, very low levels of acceptance and very, very hostile peer review. It's possible. If you've got great articles, you can do that. But otherwise, just see what the best you can do based on all sorts of criteria. The most important one is, where would readers in your field expect to find scientific articles? Is it going to be in a certain journal which you like, or a journal which they normally expect to find them? If there's a difference, you should go to where they like. Everyone has a comfort zone of journals. If you do a whole search, you find a list of articles and journals. If the journals are what you expect in your field, you're comfortable, you're happy to read them. If it's outside of your field, you'll still read the article based on the title and abstract, but you don't have the same comfort feeling. You've actually got to somehow evaluate it differently. So if you can somehow get your journal in the comfort zone of the readers, they're much more likely to accept it and read it. So firstly, you're thinking, okay, where's the best place to publish? Great. But where are you going to publish? There's lots of choices, thousands and thousands of journals. And there's all sorts of various tools and options you can do. But firstly, you and your co-authors have got to come up with a bunch of potential journals. They're called candidate journals. 4, 5, 3, whatever. Let's say 4. And so you're coming up with a bunch of journals initially from scores, dozens of journals, to filter it right down. So you look at which journals you're going to be citing, which articles are you citing. If there's a whole bunch of articles you're going to be citing from one journal, perhaps that journal is suitable as a potential candidate journal. It could be one of the co-authors that said, that's a great journal, I've published there in the past, and they're very helpful, very good peer review, very fast. So that's perhaps another reason to put them on the candidate list. The candidate journal list. And so also you've got to ask yourself some other questions, like, is the journal peer reviewed to the right level? Some of them are, as I said, like Nature, Science, very, very strong peer review, hostile peer review, very, very low accept rate, 1% or so. And some are almost no peer review. Some almost nothing, just a few words, if that. You want the middle ground. You want helpful comments from scientists who are your peers that make your paper better. Let's face it, as an author, we don't really like peer review, but we know it helps. And everyone says, I don't like peer review. Right. But are the suggestions of the reviewers helpful? Yes. Do they make your paper better at the end? Yes. Will it get more downloads and citations? Yes. Okay. And they don't even ask for their name to be on the co-author list. It's also good. It's anonymous. Great. So we recognize that peer review is necessary, but at the same time, you want good, strong peer review, gives you good information, helpful to you. How about the journal's audience? The second point here. Journal's audience, who will read your article? Can you tell? Do people put their hands up and say, oh, I read that journal? Of course not. So you've got to see, are there articles in that journal on the same topic as you, on your topic area? If they are, great. If you've only got, say, 5% of the articles in your topic area, the rest of the 95% are not, try and have one with quite a large chunk of your topic area in that journal. And that's what we're looking for. And that's potential audience. So, writer equals reader, basically. How fast is a journal? Does it matter how fast a journal is? Yeah. In a perfect world, you're the only person in the world researching this. All the time in the world, you can just take your time, send it to some nice, happy journal, which is very nice and good and laid back, and eventually comes back to you with the results, and eventually it goes online. The whole thing can take 8, 9, 10 months. Which is fine, but we haven't got the time. So you want to have a pretty fast peer review and pretty fast up there online. Because firstly, you can't cite your paper till it's published. So you can't use it in future job applications or funding applications or moving position or anything else. And also, the sooner you're up there, the sooner you've captured that intellectual property space, not someone else. There's a competitive element we have in publishing. Do journals tell you how fast they are? No. Sorry. Some do, some don't. Most don't. I apologize. Even Elsevier journals don't say all of them. So what you do is you have your candidate journal list. You go look online at what they've published. You look at the cover date of that particular volume. You look at some articles in there. When they're submitted, when they're revised, when they're accepted. Okay, when was it published? That gives you the particular so-called production window. That tells you how long it's taken from start to finish, which is fine. Do not pick things like review articles or special issues, but regular, ordinary articles. And then if you do that for 3 or 4 articles of each journal, you get an idea for the actual processing time per journal. I think you'll be surprised and perhaps horrified how slow some journals are. Some could be pretty fast, 6 weeks, 7 weeks from start to finish, which is really, really fast. Others could be, say, 10 months. For my journals in applied biochemistry, if the whole process takes longer than 13 weeks average, I get upset because my viewpoint is it should be less than that. And so therefore, I urge the editors to be a bit more tough on the referees to come back with their decisions quicker to make sure it can be in that time process. Impact metrics. What's impact metrics? That's things like the site score, the impact factor, the SNP, other similar things, H-index. It's useful. At the same time, it's not the be-all and end-all. It's a useful extra component in that multi-analysis of each candidate journal. And of course, if you do need to or want to publish open access, that's an extra step, because of the journals out there, a good 80% are actually not open access. And so if you are determined to publish open access, that cuts out a whole bunch. And so again, all these various aspects colour your list of candidate journals. And of course, if you are going to publish open access, make sure the journal is real. It does actually exist. There are a few fake ones. There are many fake journals out there, sadly. And so therefore, you don't want to send to a fake journal. That's just a waste of your time. If you come across a journal you think it might be fake, there are various lists out there online. You can see if the journal is potentially predatory, open access, then cross it out of your list and move on. And you're coming down with a list of these so-called 4 or 5 candidate journals. Also, you've got to think about the aims and scope of the journal. Is it really, is what you're going to be writing actually in scope for what you've got going to be published appropriately? Are you going to be writing a long article and that journal only has short articles or vice versa? So again, just see what they want, see what they need. And okay, bibliometrics, as I said, you have things like the site score, the impact factor, and so on. There's arrows each side for a simple reason. There's so many different bibliometrics. If you're really interested, you go look at Wikipedia bibliometrics. There are pages of information there. And it's interesting. Everyone thinks about the impact factor. Impact factor is historically the most interesting. It's the oldest one. It was designed for librarians to make it easier for librarians to judge the potential quality of the average articles published in a particular journal. So then you've got, you think, the right sort of audience maybe, you've got the right people, you know where it's going to be, you know who the audience are, perhaps your university library might be helpful here, perhaps some of your colleagues who published a lot might be helpful. This little box here is interesting. We've just revamped our Journal Finder tool. In the past, it wasn't particularly wonderful. Now, by throwing a lot of technology and money at it using AI, we've got a better system. You put the abstract into this Journal Finder, and it comes up with suggestions for Elsevier journals. Of course, there are many journals out there apart from Elsevier journals, but at the same time, it's a good start. It might put you on a certain track to go into a different way you thought of. So then you and your co-authors have got, say, 4 or 5 potential journals in your candidate list. Then you and your co-authors, or co-researchers, have got to agree to sequence. Because you're not going to submit to all of them at once. If you submit to all at once, it's called parallel submission. It's unethical, and actually you can be penalized. You can be banned from publishing for a couple of years if you do that. So what you've got to do is you've got to then say, okay, co-authors, what's journal A? What do we all agree is journal A? Okay. If we're not good enough for journal A, what's going to be journal B? Okay. What happens if we're really out of luck? What's the next one? Journal C. So you've got this cascade in effect. So journal A, everyone agrees journal A is the one to go for. Okay. Great. Then all the co-authors agree it's journal A and journal B. We all agree this is the sequence we're going to do. Then you look at the guide to authors of journal A before you start writing. That's the point you find out they actually have a word limit, and you're lucky you read it then, not after you started writing the manuscript. The guide to authors' job is to help the authors write their papers in a clear way so that people can better present their papers so it's easier for the editor and referees to understand and evaluate. So the guide to authors helps authors write papers so the editor can evaluate them better. That's the process. Some people are pretty laid back. Some editors are laid back about the real details of the guide to authors. And some editors are really, really, really strict. Their viewpoint is their personal text. Why are there so many guides to authors? Because there's so many different journals. Each journal has a slightly different text in there. As a publishing house, we'd love to have all guide to authors the same, but we can't because it's helping the peer review process. The editors choose the text. If they really, really have worked on that text and you don't follow it, some of them feel it's a sign of disrespect. You've antagonized them already. So if they're really laid back about things, then it might be you haven't. Do you know who is easily antagonized, who's not? No, you don't. So assume the worst. Assume that everyone wants you to use the guide to authors exactly as they've stated it, because that's the best way to get you a better chance of going out for peer review. The guide to authors, it looks different from journal to journal. This happens to be a hypertext layout. And you can download, say, an author information pack as a PDF. If you do that, that's fine. But if you downloaded it more than 3 or 4 months ago, I suggest you check the online version because it changes small bits here and there all the time. You don't want to be caught out by a change of guide to authors. Here's one guy called Paul Haddad, editor, Journal of Chromatography A. Now, JChrom A is all about the physical aspects of chromatography. JChrom B is about the biological aspects of chromatography. So, a very clear division. But some people out there think, oh, obviously Journal A is better than Journal B, so I'll send my biological stuff to Journal A. which he hates because he's not a biologist, doesn't want the squidgy stuff. He wants to have the chemical stuff. And so what he says, in fact, you ask any editor of the same story, these are the problems appear too frequently. Papers are out of scope. They haven't bothered to read the scope. The guide to authors has been ignored. The suggestion that reviewers are not used, or they suggest inappropriate ones, people you worked with before or whatever. The English quality of writing is so poor, you can't understand what's going on. And people have had manuscripts rejected and they just sent them into the next journal without changing them around. And that's not good either, because it's a waste, because it's easily found out. And the whole process of this peer review is to make your article better. You're not trying to game the system and cheat to get in. So another editor of mine, this one is editor of Protein Expression Purification. He says, basically, I'm not going to waste my time on papers that are badly written. I refuse to spend my time trying to understand what the author's trying to say. Also, he says, as a rule of thumb, if there's more than 6 grammatical errors in the abstract, it's a death reject. That's heavy, but that's the reality. And don't blame me, I'm just sharing what editors have said to me. So you might think, well, I was planning on polishing the paper during the revised version. You won't get the chance because there'll be no revised version. It'll be a death reject. So always send in your article as if it is the best final version, will be up there forever. Because once it's published, it's in a scientific record forever. So therefore, always make sure it's as best as it can be. When you're writing, you've got this idea of scientific language. If you're English first language, you're not taught scientific language writing. If you're English second language, you're not taught that either. You're taught English literature, which means writing in a certain style. And typically the sentences are 50% longer. Now for scientific language, short, snappy sentences. It's one of those things. But no one talks to you about this. Short sentences, the correct tense. A scientific paper has laid out in a certain way. The introduction typically is past tense and present tense, explaining the problem and situation. Your method you describe in the past tense, and the results you found past tense. Your discussion of them is present tense, and then the conclusions, the applications, of course, are present tense and future tense. And that gives a subconscious signal to the reader to get more data extraction from your article by getting the tenses right. But no one tells you this until today. The grammar has to be accurate, clear. If you're English first language, you tend to write about 10% too much. If you're English second language, you're about 10% too little. So it's a question of prepositions and adjectives and so on. And of course, you might be bilingual or trilingual, but you're only writing in one language. If you happen to be studying something where you are publishing in your own language, for example, law or literature or poetry or something, or local economics, whatever it is, fine. But just that one language. The rest of the world, we're publishing in English because that's the international language of science currently. 50 years ago, it was different. 50 years ago, you could publish in English, French, German, or Russian, as long as you had 4 abstracts in 4 languages at the beginning of the paper. Journals that were launched at that time, 50 years ago, the titles were often in Latin, because they didn't know if the final language was going to be English or German. In the end, it became English. It was just about English or German 50 years ago. That's why there are many Latin-titled journals. I have one of those journals myself as one of my journals I look after. So yes, it's 50 years ago, those 4 languages. Now, English. 50 years' time, maybe Chinese. I don't know. We'll see. Currently, English. Currently, English. What sort of English? Well, you've got to ask yourself, what does the journal say? There's the guide to authors. What does the guide to authors say? Have a look. It might say you can use British spelling or American spelling, but not a mixture. That's the normal way they phrase it. Some journals actually are very, very clear. They say you must use British spelling. Some say you must use American spelling. Normally they're small society journals which have that viewpoint. But in general, it's one or the other. So make sure you and your co-authors all use the same spell checker. And then you can say, I have a choice. Should I use British English or should I use American English? Tough one, huh? Any ideas in the audience which is better to use if you don't care one way or the other? American spelling or British spelling? Depends on the journal. It does. If it's a British journal and all the, as they say, you could use either, and it's a British editor-in-chief and British editors, you might be ideal to use British. But see what else has been published. But in fact, in general, it's American. If you look at a word, a scientific word that can be spelled both ways, in something like Google Scholar, you'll find the ratio about 7:1 of American spelling to British spelling. So basically, the British lost. We lost the war. The war of language. So what happens is that people out there, North America, South America, are used to American spelling. Half of Asia, American spelling. Most of Africa, American spelling. Half of Europe, American spelling. So that's why you have this ratio of 7:1. So if you're not really sure, think of the reader, use American spelling. Unless, of course, you looked at some of the papers and see that most of them are in British spelling because the editorial structure is British. So again, it's a people game. Understand what's going on, though. You want to lower the threshold of unfamiliarity to the reader by making the spelling right. Now, why do they spell colour that way? Or why is it an S or a Z or whatever? You know? So that's the thing you've got to think about, of what's best for the reader. And so if you have very strong feelings, fine. But my viewpoint is that I nowadays tend to write in American spelling when I'm sending out things out there, despite being, as you can tell from my accent, British. One of those things. It's just accepting the reality that we lost. So, you've got to be realistic here. So, in terms of scientific languages, sentences, short, direct sentences, short, snappy sentences. If you're not sure if a sentence is too long, try reading it out loud. If you stop to pause for breath partway through, it's too long. Simple guide. Of course, if you read the whole thing through, yeah. Some cultures, for example, Spanish, Italian, if you can be clever and run on the whole thing as a whole paragraph, that's wonderful literature. But not in science. In science, short, snappy sentences. Sorry, that's how it goes. Because if you try to read that out loud without an Italian sentence or a Spanish sentence, without pausing for breath, you fall on the floor. We know that. So short, snappy sentences. It's just short, short, short. Then you've got to think also, your co-researchers are your co-authors. They are most of the time, aren't they? Well, yeah, most of the time. Who's allowed to be an author? People who've helped you do the research, of course. That's the guidelines. There are various different ways of looking at it. The most common evaluation way is called the Vancouver Group rules. It's called the Vancouver Group because they first met in Vancouver. The International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. They said to be an author, you've got to contribute substantially to the concept, design, data acquisition, analysis, interpretation of data. Be involved drafting the article, revising it, approving the final version, and also focusing on things like the various aspects of the work, the accountability. Is everything right? Is everything good about that? That's a new thing that came in a few years back, that fourth point, just because of the concern that so many experiments cannot be replicated anymore. And so, because of this also, there's a new system coming in called credit, where credit is whereby each of the authors states what they've done in the paper as part of a sort of 14 or 15 different section box, which is published at the end of the paper. And that started off in health sciences, and it's spreading into life sciences and physical sciences during 2020 and onwards, as part of that transparency to help readers understand who did what on the paper. If you have, say, a lab tech helping you with collecting the data, but you're not involving her in the discussion of what's going on, she can't really be a co-author. She then becomes what's called an acknowledged individual. But if you involve her with the discussions and everything else as well, she can be a co-author as well. So it depends. Acknowledged individuals are those who've given, for example, equipment or perhaps helped you with the the processing of the manuscript or something else, are giving you a cell line, or they're not people who just say, hello, I should be there as a co-author. No. Large individuals, it's a very difficult area. Some parts of the world have great problems with having too many co-authors who don't deserve to be there. It's pretty good in Europe, but there are some parts of the world where it's different. Now, who's the first author? Who's the last author? In first author, in physics, it's easy. Physics is alphabetical, straight through, easy. But for the rest of the world, non-physics, first author is the person who's done most of the work, the leader of that particular project. So you're the first author of one project, and then you're perhaps a co-author of other projects. So at the same time, in your department, there's several different projects taking place, and you'll be co-author of one, or two, three, and you'll be the first author of another one. So that's basically how it works. They pull a paper together, they submit it to the journal, they make sure everyone's using the same spell checker, and then at the same time, then you have the corresponding author, or the senior author, is the person at the end of the paper, the person whose lab it is, the person whose funding it is, the PI, or the professor, or whatever. It was originally called the corresponding author from the old days when people did the research, they moved on as a postdoc. And if someone read the article years later, they couldn't easily contact the postdoc because they'd gone somewhere else. So they would contact the senior author or the corresponding author, the author the reader corresponded to in the future. That's why it's called corresponding author. It can be confusing, so many journals now call it the senior author. What you've got to avoid are ghosts and gifts. And as I said, a ghost author is interesting. A ghost author is someone, it's not the paranormal, a ghost author is someone who you should have had in the article but forgot. Someone who helped in the research, someone who qualified by those 4 different characteristics are involved in, but they were somehow forgotten. Now, how can you forget an author? Apparently it's pretty easy, because I actually get probably an email a month from my various journals, no, together, not per journal, but email a month, someone saying, hey, I should have been a co-author on this paper. Now, we use what's called the Committee on Publication Ethics, COPE, guidelines, and then we go to the guidelines. It says, contact all the co-authors and say, hi, this person said there should be a co-author, what do you think? 9 times out of 10, it's, oops, we forgot her. And most times it's someone who was there at the beginning of a project and then left to go to another lab, another institute, another university. And then you forgot her when you're pulling it all together to write the paper a year and a half later. But she was there setting up the experiment, setting up the whole research project, but then she moved on. Okay. So how do you make sure that person gets involved? Because if it is someone who should have been there as a co-author, you've then got to do a sort of corrigendum, whereby you apologize to the reader, this person should have been in there. So basically you all look stupid having forgotten that person. So far better that you actually think about it and reach out to these people while you're writing the paper. Hey, we're finally writing the paper. Yeah, we got there in the end, okay. And you involve this person with all the various drafts and the final version and so on, and then you involve her at the top. But if she's moved to somewhere else, fine. You just asterisk now at University of so-and-so. You don't put a university out there, but down here, a new one, because that's not where the work was done. So that's sort of a process of making sure you don't have ghost authors. Now, gift authors are people who basically get parachuted in, either, as we are finding in some places in China, that people are paying to be a co-author of a paper, which is not good. And there's all sorts of ethical things we're doing to stop that happening. And also, sometimes people who are just thinking they should be in a list of authors because they run the institute, because therefore they have that right to be a co-author. That happens certainly in some Asian countries, which is not good either. Now, the Committee on Publication Ethics' viewpoint is it's not right, and we hope it'll die out. And it'll probably die out when those senior scientists die off. In the meantime, we can just be strong about saying it shouldn't happen. So that's the viewpoint we have. Analysing trends and journal quality indicators, a bit here. Impact factor, as I said, this is one of the things. This 2-year window, if you don't know how it works, it's a 2-year window, and you're looking for how many citations there are in that particular period for the year afterwards. The person who invented it, Eugene Garfield, said, actually, this 2-year window of articles published the following year, how many citations were there? Fine. This is not good. It should be 5 years, not 2 years. So have you wondered why sometimes a journal website has the 2-year impact factor and a 5-year impact factor? Because the guy who invented the impact factor changed his mind, basically. Simple as that. There's all sorts of other bibliometrics about the half-life and the immediacy index and so on. So again, the impact factor is very simple. It's just how many articles are published in 1 year, and the next year, the year after that, how many of these were being cited, what's the math, and then it's literally to 3 decimal places, which is a bit strange, really. It's actually called citable items, or which is a bit different. So things like editorials and so on don't get counted. The impact factor average per field also changes tremendously. So if you think you should just use that one simple impact factor to compare journals across fields, it doesn't work that way. So if you're looking at, say, a neuroscience journal, the average is, what, 3.5 or so impact factor. Compare that with a veterinary, just over 1. So from that point of view, you've got very, very great difference in the impact factor per different topic area, although that's ignored often by funding bodies and by deans of research university, unfortunately. It's good to know this information. You can't compare across different fields, but people do. So apart from the impact factor, there's things like the site score, which is our version, Elsevier's version of the impact factor over 3 years. And we pick everything, including the editorials and the lot. The source normalized impact per paper, and a SciMarcia, and all different ways to look at evaluating the citation process. Another aspect of publishing is the research actually correct? Can it be replicated? And is it actually out there and findable easily? So a lot of concern happened a few years ago when, particularly in cancer research, a large number of articles could not be replicated. Is it just the way it was described in the article, or is it the way that it was that the cell line they were using was somehow contaminated, or what? And so there's that great concern. That's when the journal editors decided to put this 4th aspect in about the reproducibility. And so this whole idea of research integrity and reproducibility came in, and it's now filtered through into funding bodies, so they're now insisting for all sorts of things about reproducibility, because it's pointless on doing research if no one else can replicate it. And so all these various articles are interesting. And so what has been happening is that there's been much more emphasis on putting your data out there publicly, so it's out there. But putting it out there, it gives a good way, firstly, just to better analyze it, and secondly, to show you did the work. And so the results can be easier replicated. So we have something called Mendeley. We bought it because it happens to be a good reference management system. We liked it so much, then we give it away to the world. But we also have got something called Mendeley Data, whereby if you have your data sets, you can actually then upload them either privately or publicly, and then just to keep them there. It's your responsibility as a researcher to look after your data. You can't rely on the university. University may have a data store, but at the same time, what happens in 10 years' time if someone says, we're not sure about this paper, if it was right or not, where's your data? And it's somewhere at the university and it's gone by now. So it's always good to make sure that you have your data also replicated up there somewhere in some public area in the cloud, or even a private area in the cloud. So Mendeley Data is a way. There's other systems out there too, but it's useful because you publish it publicly in Mendeley Data, you get a DOI. In effect, you get an extra published article. It's findable, it's citable, and also it means that people might find your data and then contact you for some collaborative work in the future. And then when you have published it, you link that DOI of the data in Mendeley to the article and vice versa, which actually is useful. You can also have different versioning. So if you have an early version, you've got a later version and so on, it keeps all the various versionings there, the idea being that everything's there. So this is also your intellectual property rights. It shows that you were the first people to actually do research on this area. So it's a good thing to have. And of course, it's out there, and it's in the cloud, and it's a free. That's how it gets linked up. And so in the past, particularly in certain fields, people didn't want to share their data because they thought it could be stolen and things could be done with it. But this way, by having it very much versioned and actually up there with a DOI, that you can put your data out there knowing that it won't get, shall we say, misused. By putting it out there, you get credit for the work that's been done. It gives you some citations. It can also get people to join with you to do collaborative works. It's also useful as a way to put data that actually is negative research. Because so often people find things that doesn't achieve anything, so they can't publish it. Well, there's not many journals that want to publish negative data, negative research. It's difficult to know. It's time-consuming to write an article, so it's far better just to publish the data up there saying this didn't work. It saves people repeating that experiment worldwide with resources, time, money, perhaps lab animals and so on. So it's useful to actually make sure that these failed experiments are listed somewhere so they're findable by some sort of search engine. And of course, the society as a whole has to regain its respect for scientists. And we need to do that by making sure that everything is really clear, visible, and there's no abuse and so on. So yeah, it's a quite powerful message which we haven't really thought about until the last couple of years, about the needs of transparency of your data you've done in such a way that it can be findable in the future. Now, moving, coming right back to the article, you've done your research, you've selected the journal you wanted, you've read the guide to authors of that particular journal, it tells you all sorts of things, then it's a question to think, okay, now it's time to write the article. Everyone has agreed, everything's there, and then you start thinking, who's going to write the structure and so on, who's going to polish it. There's all various things you think about. It's falling apart here. So here we've got a typical structure of a research article with a fish. Why a fish? Why not? A picture. I wanted a picture I could describe later, you'd remember. We think in pictures, we're human beings. It has to have some relevance, of course. And the relevance is, well, this is a typical structure of a research article. Title, abstracts, keywords, then you've got introduction, methods, results, discussions, conclusion, acknowledgements, references, and so on. So here is the head of the article. Here's the middle, here's the tail. So here's the head, here's the body, here's the tail. So that's how you can see why I had a fish, to find something which had a head, a body, and a tail. Layout. Okay. The title, abstracts, and keywords can be seen anywhere in the world. You don't have to be inside the IP address of the university. You can be in downtown in some coffee restaurant and just go and find these things in PubMed or in Science Direct or in Springer Link or anything. And then the main text is as normal sequence is laid out. It does vary a bit from journal to journal. If a journal tells you how it wants it, use that, because that journal has decided specifically to tell you the layout. If they haven't told you the layout, this is a useful way of laying it out. This is the logical line. Here's what we did, here's what we found, here's what things going on. This doesn't work for things like reviews, microarticles, social sciences, of course, much more discussion, much less results, but this is a good idea, a good basis. And it is a challenge to get it right. Now, that's how you lay out the article. How do you write the article? Do you start with a blank piece of paper and start with a title? No. That is hard work. Think of it as building a wall This is your timeline here. So the figures in the tables is your data. And then, based on that, it's your comfort zone, basically. You then describe the methods you used, then some results you're describing, then you discuss those results, then you write your conclusion, and then you write your introduction. Then you write the title, abstract, and keywords. So as a timeline, you're building a wall. Once you've built the wall, then you lay it out, fish style. But you build the wall first. It's less likely to have sort of brain freeze or writer's cramp or anything else. And then it's far easier to actually to get going. And now I'm going to just briefly go through some aspects of the components of an article using the fish style. See, fish, wall, you see the pictures? Title. As short as it can be, but still telling what's going on. Now, things like newspapers, magazines, actually, they have professional staff writing headlines. We don't have that luxury with scientists. We do it ourselves. And so what you can do, and also, unfortunately, many referees will not give guidance on your title of your article. They see it as outside of their remit, which is sad, because they should do, but they don't. We always teach it in the reviewer workshop, but they should actually help you with your review, title of your review. But the reality is, they don't. So, you are on your own. So you and your co-authors work out what should it be. And so it's in draft. You're going to do 4, 5, 6 versions of the article as in draft form. So start with what you think is about right. Say, okay. So it has to be identifying the main aspect of the paper, the core of the paper. You've got to get somehow your article to be attractive to read. Imagine you're this reader. You just downloaded a whole bunch of articles from PubMed. There's all the titles. And you're skimming through them, and one leaps out at you. What did that author team do to make you be attracted to that article? That's what you've got to replicate. So what you do, okay, the main core of the article, that's what it's all about. You start with the aspect, not at the end of the title, because humans skim down, and as the eyes can't track a whole page, they'll track half a page. So therefore, it has to be in the first few words what the main part is. So it's the main issue of the art paper, you begin with that, so the eye can find it. It has to be short as you can be, as accurate as you can be, and that's a difficulty, because to be short and accurate often are opposites. Often trainee, junior researchers, they go to a conference presenting a poster, and the title of the poster is 3 lines long. That's not how you do it. You've really got to work on this. It is practice. That is one thing. The more you do write, the easier you get at doing titles. No weird abbreviations. And again, your job is to hook the reader with what you have written in the article, but also be honest. You're not going to do something different. And it's actually sometimes you get some very interesting results. So many years ago, 20 odd years ago, I was actually looking into the holy grail of, is there a link between downloads and citations? There isn't, but then I was looking for these things. And then there was a highly downloaded paper in Feb's Letters at the time, that year, and that paper was from a Spanish group, and it was entitled, Why Females Live Longer Than Males. Everyone wanted to look at that paper. That's all it was, very short and snappy title. When you go inside, look at it, the abstract, hormones, boring, move on. So it's hugely downloaded, not very well cited. But anyway, it's a top marks for a great title. So yes, again, make it as snappy as you can, as attractive as you can, just to get people to go in to look at your abstract. To find you, they've got to use keywords. And the keywords, what keywords are you going to use? How do you find things? You put keywords in, you go into your favorite search engine, and you find the keywords. And that finds you the articles. And then you think, oh, okay, neat, I know that, don't know that. And that's its job. So you find what you think are appropriate keywords, you put it into your favorite search engine, and see if what it finds is basically what you're about to write, or what you are writing. If If it does, great, good keywords. If you find there's far, far more, then you've got too much noise to signal, so therefore you need to perhaps fine-tune the keywords a bit. If you find your keywords give you 8 hits in PubMed, you're definitely a bit too narrow. No one's going to find you ever, ever, ever. And so from that point of view, just play around with the keywords. You want to have 100 or 200 papers published in the last few years, and that would be a nice sort of number of what actually you need to be in that group, that audience. It's also useful to see what these keywords, see what they do. Because those keywords in your favorite search engine give you a bunch of articles which you didn't know about. Look at them, read them. Are any of them of value? Are you going to be citing any of those? Are you going to be somehow including that in your description of in your writing the manuscript? Because when you send your article in to a journal, it'll go to referees. They will look at your keywords, use their favorite search engine, probably the same as yours, and find out what articles are there and see if you've cited the most appropriate ones. And if you haven't, they're thinking, what's going on here? Why did these authors not cite these special papers? Is it because they're lazy, or is there something wrong with the paper, or what's going on here? So always use your keywords as a sanity check to make sure you haven't missed any references. Let's face it, you come across articles almost by accident. Someone tells you about something, or you find something by mistake, and then you find it. This is you structurally looking for things. So it fills in the gaps in a Swiss cheese, basically. So it's always very useful to actually broaden your horizons a little bit, to see what's there, and to see if there's any valuable references to help you in your research and to add them to your paper. Because if you don't, the referees will be upset with you and mention it in their comments. The abstract, of course, is where you are going to be sharing what you did and what you found in a short way with the audience, the reader. So they get the title, they read the abstract, and then if all's good, they go on into the article. Sometimes you've seen a great title, look at the abstract and think, not for me. Well, it's done its job. It's stopped that reader wasting 20 minutes of her life, and so therefore she goes somewhere else. This is good. And it tells the readers what you did, what you found. Some journals are very, very tough. They say 50 words, but in general it's a paragraph. If they let you do highlight bullet points too, great. Highlight bullet points is just literally to sum up, as well as the text of the abstract, what's in your article. If you can't think of some bullet points of the benefits of what's in your article, why have you written it? Huh? So you really make sure that bullet points are useful. If you're given the opportunity of a graphical abstract, even better, because we think in pictures. So either create a new image as for the abstract, or alternatively use one of the most appropriate figures from your paper as in the graphical abstract as a way to get your readers engaged with your article. Say it's an advert. It can be seen by everyone without having to go onto campus or whatever to go into the IP address of the library. The thing about abstracts also is that the referee is not given the full paper to evaluate until they agree they're going to evaluate it. They're given the title, the abstract, and depending on the journal, they're also giving the authors and the affiliations as well. And based on that, the referees have to decide, do they want to review the paper, yes or no? So the abstracts has to be strong, clear, because also you're trying to attract referees to be interested in the work such that they will review it for you. So again, do not think of it as an abstract as something just slinged together. It's actually a very, very important aspect of the paper, often overlooked. The title and abstract are the bits which can be seen by everyone, so do spend some time on these. This happens to be chemistry. Here's what we did, here's what we found, basically. So the abstract's job is just very clear. It's a précis of what your paper's all about. Of course, using the fish style, the next thing is the introduction. A few, perhaps, seminal papers, a couple of recent reviews, a few words describing that, explains where your work sits in that particular part of the research ecosystem. So that's what you're not writing a history lesson. You're just saying, okay, here is what's happening out there, and here's what we're doing. So is there a problem? Are there solutions? Are the solutions good enough? Have you got something better? Is there a better method? Even limitations maybe in what you're doing. What do you want to achieve? What you want to achieve, introduction, wall style, was written after you've written the discussion and conclusion, remember. So you should be able to make sure that what you hope to achieve in your introduction text matches your conclusion and your discussion. If not, you've got a logic problem. So it's always the idea just to paint that picture of where the field is and where your work fits into that. It's a funnel idea. So it's not a history lesson, it's brief. You're not going to put the introduction and so on in all different places. It's simple, this sequence going through. Now, here's the problem, here's what we did, here's what we found, and so on. You're not going to say how amazing it is, no, first time, great, amazing, fantastic, Nobel Prize material, no. And only relevant references. References is simple. The job of references is twofold. One is to let a reader who doesn't understand a particular point go deeper. So nowadays it's all hypertext linked. So they go, oh, not sure about that. Click, click. They read the abstract or the whole article, come back, keep on going. So that's the job of the abstract, just to brief the reader who doesn't know that aspect. And the second job of the abstract is to validate why you've done the work. Basically, these researchers have done the work, we've read their work, done some more work on top of that. That's our validation. That's all you need to, that's the only validation you need. Standing on the shoulders of the giants who came before you. The next aspect, fish style, is the method of the experimentation. Now, a referee would love to look over your shoulder as you're doing the work to make sure it's done properly. They can't do that, so they rely on your description of the method, if that's good or not. That's the challenge they have. So what they do is that they think, okay, are the details clear enough? Now, some journals are not very nice. They say you've got this much space and you need this much, in which case you use this much for a short method. The last line says, and the full method protocol can be found in the supplementary file. That makes sure that your work can be replicated. If there are some things that are standard, like you purified the protein by the Lowry method, just mention that. There's no need to explain the whole process, if it's a standard process. Always use the various equipment manufacturers, what sort of machine they have, if it's a certain chemical, what purity it is. Some journals even encourage you to use the catalogue numbers of the chemicals, make it easier for the replication to happen. If you ask someone like Sigma Aldrich what phone calls they get from customers, customers say, I've read an article and it says you supply this, I want it. And they say, well, what's the purity? I don't know. So it's up to the authors, if they know that, say, 98% purity does not work, but 99.9% purity does work, to mention that in the method description, just to make it easier for the reader to replicate the work. Think of the reader as a friend in another part of the world. You want them to repeat your work. How are they going to do that? Make sure you do it very clearly and carefully. Control experiments should be in there, of course, as we mentioned. You're not going to discuss any of this. That's further down the manuscript, this logical line. You're writing in the past tense. And so if the referee thinks your method looks very sloppy and not very good, then any results you're sharing are suspect, any conclusions irrelevant. If your method looks like it's well written and it can actually be easily replicated, any results you're sharing have value and any conclusions have value as well. So always be careful about how to describe your methodology. Now, with the results, this is something that young researchers often get wrong. They want to somehow justify the paper by saying, well, we've done all these various things, these are all the results, so here they are, everything. Far too much. The job of the researcher is to decide the minimum amount of information to share with the reader. Not to hide things, but just to make it easier for the reader. What are you going to share? So the skill of a writer, an author, this is a picture of an iceberg. Imagine this is what you're going to be sharing with the reader. That's what you're not going to be sharing with the reader. How do you get that balance right? You've got to focus on the main findings, not everything, just things that tell a story. Once you've decided what those main findings are, make sure the methods you described in the methods section link to those particular results. It's a bit silly if you've got 4 or 5 methods and you're describing them and they're about stuff down here. You've actually got to be describing the methods you use to get the things up there. If you find things that are different to what's expected, oops, we must have made a mistake, or delete that. No, it's the wrong way. Oh, that's interesting. Is this an artifact? So you check it and double check it, perhaps even triple check it, to make sure it's not an artifact. Good, you know it's now real, it's scientific data, which you've proved different to other people in the past. Good, you hang on to that. Make sure your stats are appropriate. If you're using the wrong stats package, you can make a mockery out of your results. So make sure, if you're not sure, there's always someone on campus who'll understand what sort of stats program you should use to analyze your results. If you can, use lots of figures and short, snappy tables. Not huge, snappy tables, which 8 people in the world will love. That's great for the supplementary files, but short, snappy tables with figures. Why? We think in figures. If you have a figure with a very comprehensive figure legend, that stands on its own. There's no need to write about that in text. There's less writing for you to do, which is good. There's less reading for the reader to do, good. And the reader absorbs the more information because it's in a visual form, so it's a win-win, basically. But make sure your figure legend is detailed enough. If you are finding you're actually writing next to the figure more information, your figure legend wasn't enough. So just get the balance right. Sometimes the figure legend is 6, 7 lines, but it's done its job. It doesn't need to be written about in the body text of the article. And of course, when you are doing your results and you're laying it out visually, 3D plot or 2D plot, if you are bilingual, trilingual, make sure that the axis text is in the language it should be, English in this case. If you're doing a photograph, you must have a scale marker in the corner. Again, no other language tucked in there. If you're going to have something like, that happens to be pharmacology here. It says drug crystals. Now, it could be that you're trying to explain to the reader that that drug crystals can be found in some matrix. And you could be woken up at 3 in the morning, shown these and say, oh yes, drug crystals. Perhaps the reader is not so fortunate and skilled as you. So therefore, you could describe it in the figure legend, but also better to have a couple of arrows saying drug crystals, just to be very clear to the reader what you're getting at, which is fine. Here, of course, if you're using color in graphs, think about the needs of the reader. If you can see this, you just about see the difference or not. One is dark blue, one is pink, dark pink. If you print that out in black and white, it looks the same color exactly. This was chosen with care. So you should do triangles and squares or something, just so the reader is not forced to go to a color printer. Think of the needs of the reader here. Again, just simple. And color is free in online normally. Well, there are a few some society journals charge for color online. I think it's criminal because there's no extra processing costs involved. But anyway, in general, it's free to be online. So use color sparingly just to make the better appearance. You don't want to have all fancy flashing and whatever, but you want to be simple and clear just to make an easier picture. Remember, of course, that 10% of males are red-green colorblind. So another factor, by the way. So you don't want to have red-green here. You want 2 other colors. Because 10% won't get it. Discussion, what do the results mean? You've chosen results carefully, you've got to discuss them, and each result you've chosen to share with the audience you're going to discuss. If you have, say, 6 results, discuss 6 of those. If you have 6 results, you discuss 4 of them, there's 2 missing. You either cut 2 out or discuss 2 more. They have to match exactly. They all should be interpreted. Of course, do the results relate to the original question? I hope so, because you wrote the introductory section after you wrote the discussion, remember? So they should match. Have other people found things differently? If you found something different, you're very clear. Other researchers have found other results, reference. However, we're sure it's not an artifact, and here's what we think is going on. So you're actually very clear. It could be that your introduction, your concept of what's going on is wrong. But other people will find your paper, they'll reproduce the work, they'll have a different interpretation, but you're the first people in the world who found this, so they can actually at least can then replicate that work and then come up with their interpretation, and they will cite you for having found that particular property in the first place. Are there limitations? Maybe there are. Maybe your cell line's been compromised. Maybe the place where you took all these samples is now flooded or destroyed in an earthquake or something, whatever. So if there are limitations, mention it, or it could be that particular piece of equipment is no longer made, whatever. Just mention it. It's transparent as you can be. And of course, that whole discussion process should lead on to a conclusion. And you've got to make sure that there's no new terms or ideas come in here, and also make sure that the statements don't go beyond what the results say. So if you've got results doing this, the discussion should not be that. I said earlier, we recognize we have to write the papers up to finish the experiment, to get the credit, but we want to move on to something else. So we're writing up the paper, we move on to something else. That's much more fun, much more interesting, but that's still got to be done and finished off. But sometimes you can get leakage of what you're doing here somehow creeps into the paper you're writing on. That's a new concept, a new term, a new idea has crept in from the work you're doing. So you've got to be very careful about that, because that's your next paper, not this paper. Conclusions, of course, global conclusions, specific conclusions, applications, uses. Future experiments, great. Future experiments is useful to say, well, actually, here's what still needs to be done. And we're doing this one already. That's the next one you're working on. And of course, that's great. That tells the reader, oh, good, they're working on that, fine. So I can wait till they publish. It could be, of course, that people will say, oh, they're working on that already. Shucks. Too late. It's boxed off now. Okay. Potential competitors. Or it could be people who say that you're actually working on this already and think, oh, that's neat. I'll contact them, see if we can actually work with them to collaborate. So it's always good, if you are working on something, to mention it there. Also, other people can say, well, they're working on this, so it's off ground, but these they're not, so I'll think about one of those. So that's the sort of thing you're doing. You're helping the field move forward, and what you're doing, by you deciding what future experiments are needed, you are shaping the field. You're pointing in a direction you want the field to go. That's the subtlety that you, as a researcher, can have on your whole environment of your peers, suggesting where the research should go. So it's always a useful thing to do. It's your impact on steering the field in these conclusions, these future experiment suggestions. You're not going to summarize the paper. That's, of course, the abstract's job. And you're not going to say how wonderful it is. That's the people who cite you can say how wonderful it is, not you. That's how it works. Then, of course, you have references that come after that. And most people are using a reference management system. It's an idea. If not, I suggest you start using one. It's your responsibility, not the journals or the editors, to get the references right. If you get it wrong reference, then only about a third of the journals in the world use reference management software checking. So we do, for example. So if we see a reference which actually doesn't mesh, we'll say to the author, this doesn't look like it's the right reference. Can you please check on this? But in fact, many publishing houses don't do this, which means that if those journals are covered by, say, a Clarivate for impact factor, that author will not get noticed, and so therefore they will lose a citation. It's always not fair on the author. They haven't got a citation because you didn't do the text right. And so there are different sorts of these reference management software. Mendeley's a bit big there. We're biased. I say we liked it, we bought it, and we give it away for free. But typically it's EndNote and RefManager. They used to be competing till they were bought by the same company. And a comparison of them is a Wikipedia link here. You can go and look and compare the various systems. It's a useful thing about any reference management system. Say you have Journal A, and they've got a certain layout style, and then you're unsuccessful, and you've got to go to Journal B, and you've got a different reference style. You can just download that list of references in a different style straight away the click of a mouse, as opposed to rewriting them all. So that's the usefulness about having them all stored in a central system. It will download them in the correct format for the journal you're going to choose to send into. Supplementary material, there's things which is at the end of the article, hidden away. In the old days of print, it was never printed, but now things aren't printed very much, but it's there. It is, some things are specific. So if you've got, say, a long method protocol which wouldn't fit in the space allowed, you can put it there. If you've got, say, various figures, and one figure is the one you're choosing to put in the article, the other ones will still be there. Say the Journal of Cell Biology says, if you make any changes to the color balance of articles, you should really put the original unchanged article figure in a supplementary file so all the readers can see what you started from. There's all various reasons to use supplementary files, supplementary data. The one problem currently with supplementary material, supplementary files, they're not easy to find by data mining software. That's the sort of, we know that. So because of that, by putting your data in something like Mendeley data and then getting this DOI, it's easier to find because that's searchable by the data mining tools and also or data in brief or something similar. The idea being putting it in a supplementary material is fine, but it's better if it goes somewhere else. Now, do referees look at supplementary data? Some do, some don't. You have to assume they do. So everything in there has to relate to the article, not to be a place you dumped some data to say you've published it, basically. Then you've got to think about the covering letter, the cover letter. Should you do a cover letter? Is it worth it? Yeah, it is. It's like if you're applying for a job, you just send in your CV, or do you send in a CV and a covering letter? Obvious. Do editors read the cover letter? 9 times out of 10 they do. Not everyone, but 9 times out of 10 they do. The job of an editor is very simple. 2 jobs, actually. One is to filter the junk, do desk rejects, and secondly, to look for good material. So you're going to say to the editor, this is good material, basically. So you're trying to hook the editor on your side. What makes your manuscript special to the journal? Is it perhaps that this journal has had several articles saying, we couldn't do this, we couldn't do that, and you found a new method? Great. Or is it this is the place everyone puts their particular papers in this particular ecosystem? That's the place to be? Fine, whatever. All those different reasons why you should go to that journal. And of course, it's 1 page maximum. That's the challenge. All authors approve. Here's what's important to the field and to your journal, and here's some potential reviewers. Now, if, for example, you don't have to put reviewer suggestions here, there's somewhere else in the journal system, where when you're starting to submit, it says, okay, list potential reviewers. You can use this place for potential non-reviewers. What's a non-reviewer? Someone who has a conflict of interest. Now, in theory, when a person is asked to review a paper, if it's a bit too close to their field of research, where they feel it might be a conflict of interest, they should decline, and so that way they don't get to see the paper. But at the same time, you can be a bit proactive and make sure this actually does happen. So it could be you can say to the editor, hey, editor, I'd rather you didn't send this paper to this group in Melbourne, Australia, and this group in Toronto, because they're working in the same field as me, and I would like them to see this scientific paper after it's been published, not before. Now, most times, a journal editor will listen to your suggestion and go with that. If you give a list of, say, 40 or 50 people you do not want to see this particular article before publication, they'll be so suspicious, they'll send it to a couple of those to find out why. Fair enough. Treat an editor with respect, they'll treat you with respect. Try and fool them, they will not be happy. If you're asked to suggest potential reviewers, some journals it's compulsory. Unless you suggest reviewers, you can't move on in the submission system. Always use their institutional email addresses. And that's important, not just their Gmail or Hotmail or 163.com. Who would you want to be a good reviewer? Whose values do you respect? Who perhaps Someone you've seen recently or someone you've read recently? Who would you like to comment on your paper? Do you need to ask their permission to list them on the potential reviewers? Not at all. It's anonymous peer review. Just list their names. Are they going to be asked? Maybe. Some editors will look at your suggestions and say, oh yes, that's a good person, I forgot that one. Yeah, good. They'll actually use your list as a sort of almost a memory jog. They might have their own ideas, and they're going to send it to those people, but they look at who you suggested to see if you know who the right people are. They think, I know I'm going to send it to these people, but yeah, that's not bad. That's not, yeah, okay. The authors know what they're doing. They've just evaluated you as people, not just your paper. And if people they've asked said, no, we're too busy, they'll come back to your suggestions and say, oh, maybe I'll try those. But they first check them out in Scopus or something similar to see that they're good people, high H index, and appropriate for the field. We have here, reviewers should represent at least 2 regions of the world. That's because there's 2 regions of the world who tend to focus just on their own area. So often authors from China will list reviewers from China, and authors from the US will list reviewers in the US. The rest of the world actually spreads out quite well. So that's why we mentioned that there. And of course, they shouldn't be your supervisor, they shouldn't be your close friends. In some guides to authors, they say they shouldn't be people you've worked with in the last 3 years. They shouldn't be your uncle in Canada. They should be people whose opinions you respect. And it could be that you can look at your introductory paragraph, see a few references here, and they are good people. So you can list those. It could be that those people are too busy, but their postdoc might have time. So that's the way it works. And of course, if you are going to suggest people, perhaps who have published a while back, just check out to make sure they're still alive. If they've passed on, you should know, it's your field. The editor will know. So always make sure that they're still around. You know, it's more than likely, if it's just recently at a conference or something, it's fine. But if it's a seminal paper from 10 years ago, maybe not. Maybe they have passed on. In which case, just check it out. Make sure they're still around. It's happened, I'm afraid. It's happened more than once. So anyway, you're doing your various process, you and your co-authors are writing various bits and pieces, putting it all together, you actually think you're getting pretty good. And then you write it, rewriting it, you put it aside for a few days, you polish it some more, and then you ask people who are not linked to the article, perhaps superior, supervisor, colleague, other people, other places, what they think about it. Think of it as like a pre-peer review. Then they give their suggestions, which you might not like, you might like. Then between you, the co-authors, decide, okay, here's the suggestions. Which ones are we going to do? Which ones are we not going to do? Who's going to make these changes? You make the changes. You polish up the paper so it's as best as it can be. Make sure all the co-authors agree this version. Then you submit it. When you submit it, it goes to the editor who says, okay, are the basic requirements met? There's a little filter here because we actually make sure that everything's there, like the conflict of interest statement, the right number of figures, and so on. If this is outside of scope, it's a quick out-of-scope reject. If the English is so bad, reject. And so if it looks like it might be possible, okay, who's the best people in the world I can send it to? They decide, okay, these 2 people, and they send it to these 2 people, and one might say yes, and one might say nothing and time out after a week or so, or might say, no, sorry, I'm too busy. And eventually 2 people are found to say yes. They're given between 7 and 14 days to come back with their comments. Some journals give them 3 days. It's a very, very fast journal. And then they come back with their recommendations. Referees do not decide, they recommend either accept, reject, revise. Then the editor's job is to make a decision to reject, accept as is, or revise. Simple as that. If it's accepted as is, it's very rare, very, very rare. If you had a paper accepted as is, and the average in life sciences is 1 in 200. That's why I asked everyone done 200 papers. So if you've had a paper accepted as is, and you publish less than 200 papers, you're ahead of the curve. Good for you. Of course, the next paper you send in, which might get rejected, is a bit rather sad. If you get rejected, it happens to everyone, even Nobel laureates. You're allowed to get angry for 5 minutes or so. That's it. You and the co-authors get together, either by Skype or in person, all agree the editor's an idiot, the referees are stupid, blah, 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 blah. Then move on. Okay. It happens to everyone. You then start to look carefully at what they've said. Also, read carefully what they say. Sometimes you stop reading when you see the word reject, and you just, It might say, you're rejected, but fix all these things, and we'd love to see a new version. That's called a reject with hope letter. We do have that version in our submission systems. So always read what it says, get your co-authors to read what it says, all agree it says what it says, and then move on from there. If they say basically, your paper's rejected, go away and never come back. This is pretty clear. Okay, go away, never come back. But what have they said? What comments have they said to improve your paper? Okay, that's the important thing. Then you look at this between you, say, okay, fair enough, they got a point. Who's going to do what? So which author is going to do which bit of this revision? Then you all decide this, you then decide a timetable to revise, and it's not long normally, and then you do the revision of the paper. It's an extra experiment, you work out, do you want to do this or not? If you do, you decide who's going to do this. If you can't do it yourself, you've got someone else to come on board, do the experiment, then you add them as a co-author. And then it's the point, you think, okay, I've improved all the various bits they've asked. They don't want it back, they said that, so I'll go on to Journal B. Remember we had Journal A, B, C, D, E? Journal B. You read the Guide to Authors of Journal B, you change around the layout of the article to match Journal B's Guide to Authors, you download the reference style to its Journal B reference style now, and you change the covering letter. The last thing Journal B editor wants to get is a covering letter. Dear Journal editor, we're sending you this because Journal A is the best place to publish this work. And they hate each other, Journal A and Journal B editors. They compete with each other. The last thing they want is to know that they are the substitute, the Journal B, or perhaps even the Journal D, they don't know. But you don't want them to know this, and so basically you want them to be not antagonistic to you, so make sure. The trick is on the hard drive, you label that file Journal A, or Journal whatever, covering letter. So when you start to upload it to the next journal, you realize just in time, stop, change it, re-upload. Good trick. It happens too often, I can assure you. Far too often. We have these horror stories from editors who really feel, well, undervalued, should we say. It's a polite way of phrasing it. If they've said, hey, it's a revision, then what happens is okay, if it's a minor revision, it goes back to the editor, who says, okay, have they fixed all the things? If it's a major revision, it goes back to the reviewers. Have all your concerns been met? So for a major revision, the referees have concerns, they hope you can fix it, they're not sure you can. For a minor revision, they think you can fix it if you go through all the points and do it. It's not a guarantee, but it's pretty close. When you have decided to do all this revision, then you see what they've asked you to do. But some journals ask you to color code it. Some ask you to use line numbers. What you must not do is just say, thank you for all the points, we accept them all, we've done it, here it is. That's useless because the editor does not know what you've done. They want to know line by line, point by point. So you do cut and paste, referee 1, referee 2, A, B, C, D, E, and then you literally, this is the point, it makes sense, yes, we agree entirely, we change the text, here's what you put now. So by doing through that, it's point by point, that's a way to reassure the editor you've taken account of all the various points mentioned by the reviewers and you've changed the manuscript appropriately. When you do change the text, make sure it's polished. If you just do quick insert of text without polishing the whole lot, it looks very scrappy. Also, the editors will say, this is not a good revision because you haven't polished the text. If they're polite, they'll say, try again. If they're not polite, they'll just toss it out. If you don't like what a particular referee says about a particular topic because you think you're right and they're wrong, you, all co-authors, have to agree this, not just one author, all co-authors. Then what happens is you then say, okay, this is rebuttal time. So you then send your paper in, saying we've done all these changes, we haven't changed this one because we have rebuttal, we think that this should not be changed because this reason. Perhaps that referee has not seen this particular paper, and we think that our paper, that text should stay as it is. rebuttal. Be very polite, because what happens is that text, the editor will look at and say either, yes, I'll accept that, so the record of science stays what you want it to be, or they'll say, no, we don't. If they say, yes, it is, they'll send that, your text, to the actual referee, saying, hey, referee, all the points are okay, except there's a rebuttal on one of your points. Here it is. So what happens is that's the point. Anonymous peer review, you don't know them, they know you. Be polite to them. In their spare time, they did this for you. So just take your time. You must make sure everything's polished, make sure that all of the co-authors agree the revised version. If you revise it on your own without including all the co-authors, because one's on vacation or something, no. You've got to make sure everyone has seen this and agrees it, because if someone disagrees with what you've done, they can insist you withdraw the paper, change it till they agree, all of you, and then re-upload it again. So from that point of view, always make sure everyone has done it right. And then you're basically one of the 30% with luck, accepted, not 70% rejected. You've got to be consistent, check and double check your work, clear logical story, use referee comments. And that basically means, it's not rocket science, but it's just common sense. But often we just don't think about it. It's a structural way we've been looking at here. Here's a nice mnemonic I'll let you read through, because you can read through faster than I can talk. Be ethical, basically, yes. Open access, a few short very slides on open access. There's so much information on open access. There's so much up-to-date open access information out there. But basically, you've got gold open access, whereby an article is paid for by the author, the funding body, or university, so the reader pays nothing. So it's not a subscription, it's an open access article. They get more downloads. At the moment, they seem to be getting about the same number of citations. We're not sure if that's going to be changing in the future. Green open access is called open archiving, whereby after the so-called the period of embargo, then you can then publish your accepted manuscript you sent in, not the final version with all the extra information in there, but say the accepted author manuscript with the reviewer's comments can be posted on your website of your university or your university repository or whatever. And that's a free process. People publish in open access for different reasons, sometimes because the field expects it. So genetics, cell biology expects that most of the work will come open access. Some areas like economics, no one's interested. It's all subscription. Sometimes it's a funding body mandate. The funding body insists this happens, which is fine. If you're publishing gold open access, of course, the same with any other journal. Find the right journal. Make sure it's in the directory of open access journals, DOAJ. See what the funding body and your institute wants. This is a changing field all the time. Make sure you use the right license, different licenses, and then get it out there, and then use the information appropriately. As an author of an open access journal, you retain the copyright. You can send it anywhere in the world. Promotion, you can use the services that the publisher provides. For example, in Science Direct and so on, we actually do marketing all the various articles and the like. But also you can draw attention to these yourself. And the Researcher Academy has a whole bunch of resources on this. And here, there's a few links which you'll get when you see the slides, which you go into and then find these information. Now, the thing I want to finish with is publication ethics. Publication ethics is a serious thing, because you don't want to be caught out by mistake, and it's getting easier and easier now to find people who are trying to cheat. And it does actually mean that the record of science is permanent, so if you do something wrong, it's up there forever, long after you've retired. And so therefore, we've got to be very, very careful. We've got lots of rights and privileges, but we also have to be ethical. Of course, there's things like scientific misconduct, where people making things up, whole images made up, or results changed and so on. That's a whole different area. For publication misconduct, you've got plagiarism, where we're copying someone else's work without citing it. You've got duplicate publication or self-plagiarism, whereby you are publishing the same thing twice. Duplicate submission means sending things through other journals at the same time, which is not good. You should always acknowledge other people, hence the citations. You should always make sure that the co-authors are mentioned, no ghost authors, and of course any conflict of interest should be mentioned. The transparency has to be there nowadays. Plagiarism is interesting because most professions of the world don't have to worry about this, but with researchers they have to. They've got to explain where all the details have come from if it wasn't them. Now if you're taking information from other places as part of your pulling together your articles as co-authors, and you're using someone else's words as well as going to be citing them, put the citation and put their words in inverted commas so you know as co-authors that that text isn't your text. Because if you're just going between different people and some people are polishing this and that, you might forget what's yours and what's not yours. And that way it saves you being an accidental plagiarist, because these things get checked. And it's better. You might decide to leave the speech marks in because you can't think of a better phrase, but at least it's very clear it wasn't your text. You're being as transparent as you can be. So duplicate publication, you can publish more than once for specific reasons, like a translation, if all parties agree. Or alternatively, if you published, say, once for, say, physicians, and you want to repurpose that for, say, biochemists, you can take the same data, explain you published it previously for physicians, and explain why you're now going to do a different discussion around the same data to have a different aspect for biochemists. That's possible as long as you're very transparent about these things. Every university uses something called Turnitin to check that the theses are not copied from elsewhere. And that service takes also all the information from the Crossref database, about 55 million articles, adds that to that, and then comes up with a whole interesting database of information, which every submission now is looked at and compared to give an overlap score, or a so-called plagiarism score. Everyone self-plagiarizes slightly. It's a known thing, a few percent, because we write in a certain style. So if you've published many times, we might come back with the same phrasing here and there. It can't be helped. The method can only be written in so many ways. And so all these various things are all aspects of this overlap score. It used to be that only random articles were looked at normally after a complaint. Now every article is checked. It takes around 15 to 17 minutes per article. It happens between submission and it getting to the editor. It arrives with a so-called overlap score as part of the manuscript report. It's up to the editor to decide to look at this or not. Look at it, it's all color-coded to show what the overlap is with other published material. This happens to be an old article, but it's from the days before we checked everything, so it's a published article here. The thing about this cross-check is it color codes identical text. So the yellow text here is the yellow text there, identical. That text here is that text there, that text is that text, that's that, and that's that. This is, I'd say, a Control-C, Control-V paper. Cut and paste. And that made a new paper. Oh, well, they found that figure somewhere else. So these people, who are these people, some of these people, made an extra paper. In the days when that particular country was giving bonuses in cash for every paper you published. In the past, when this got found out, it got removed, disappeared from literature. Now, it's not allowed to. Now it has to stay up with a watermark. The National Library of Medicine in the US has said this to us. We have to use this system. So now we do. The watermark is retracted. And in the PDF, in the HTML, it says retracted, and then text about why. If you look this one up, you'll find that people's names are here and their institutes, but at the same time, that's how it works nowadays. That stays up after the researchers have retired, after they've passed on. It's up for hundreds of years. Not good for someone's collaboration prospects, maybe. For figures, you can manipulate a bit because you're trying to make the figure easier to understand for the reader, but there's certain things you can't do. You can change the brightness, contrast, color balance, and non-linear adjustments if you mention it, and you put the original unchanged in the supplementary file. You mustn't move things around, add things, and so on. So it happens. This is a long time back, but this is a great paper, American Journal of Pathology. This is fluorescent cell staining, and there's some great interesting stains here and great discussion around it. Some people took this in Photoshop, they boosted the signal so it becomes brighter, added a spot here, a spot there, a spot there, and a spot there. Turned it upside down and published it in Life Sciences 2004 on a different topic. So when it was found out, eventually, about 2006, it was now has a watermark across it saying retracted. You cannot find that figure anymore except with a watermark across it. So, yeah, it happens. We do have other figure checking software out there, which we are trialing. This is an interesting one. There's actually a group called PubPeer who get together online and actually look for these things to help us, which is great. So, it's interesting, we get a lot of these sorts of, this is slicing and staining. It's your field, you recognize these sorts of things. Various controls, conditions, and so on. Except that is that. And that is that, that's that, that's that, that's that. So this is definitely, no, this is, looks real, fake. Happens. It's our job as policemen to do these things, look at these things. This is interesting, another one. The guy published, it's a particular bit of staining. He decided to publish then, rotated it slightly, published it in another paper, published it again. And I'm surprised he was caught before he boxed the compass. So yeah, it happens, I'm afraid to say. So 80 in the same tissue. Yeah, unusual, sadly. This one, just. You've got different organs, and you've got different sorts of treatments, different tissue types and things. So why is that? Why is that? Why is that? Why is that? Yeah, that's fake. So we're working with the text to actually, we're either taking this down as a retraction with the author's consent or without the author's consent. That's our job. Okay. PubPeer, interesting bunch of people. Online resources, lots of good stuff out there. It's called the Researcher Academy, and then there's a whole bunch of things. And later on, when you get the information link to this as a slide set, there's also be other information about the Researcher Academy, which I'll go into a bit later. Check your university library website. They've got lots of useful stuff there. See what other information is out there. See who might be an editor or a board member of some journals because they're useful to ask advice of. You don't go and stalk them and get them to rewrite your paper, of course not. But you go and ask them, perhaps occasionally if there's some help or their comments on something. And then basically, this is me, or for the next few years anyway. And this is the Researcher Academy. And here we are 2 hours later. So thank you for your time. We're going to take a few minutes of questions, 2 or 3 minutes. Then we're going to have a break of about 25 minutes. And then if you're going to come back, great. If not, fine. The next bit is going to be all about how to be a reviewer. And if you haven't published yet, what reviewers are we looking for in your paper? So you know what they're looking for. It's useful to know. So anyway, any questions now? Or are we going to... No? Questions? Fine. 2 hours is a long time, I know. Thank you for your patience. So thank you, and I will see, hopefully, all of you and more, maybe, in around 25 minutes. Thank you.